President Yoon has another trip to Japan coming up in May for the G7 meeting, upon invitation by Japanese PM Fumio Kishida following the recent summit talks. The leaders of China and Russia showcasing a tight friendship in their first face-to-face since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and as the West doubts Beijing's intention as a, quote, peacemaker in the war. And a critical climate report giving us a final warning that the world's next thousands of years depend on what we do this decade. Good afternoon. President Yoon says South Korea and Japan have overcome history and that he is confident that Seoul is on the right path to normalizing relations with Japan. The remarks came during a 25-minute live televised address on Tuesday as the president sought to fend off skepticism over his recent visit to Japan by citing the joint response to North Korea's provocations as well as the economic benefits as the reasons for the growing need for enhancing cooperation between the two neighboring countries. He also took time to explain the government's new plan to make changes to the current 52-hour-per-week working system. Yoon said more data and public opinion will be gathered before a final proposal is made, adding he himself believes working more than 60 hours a week is unreasonable from a health perspective. And as what Seoul's top office sees as part of a positive outcome from the recent Seoul-Tokyo summit, President Yoon will be attending the upcoming G7 meeting in Hiroshima upon Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's invitation. There, Yoon could look forward to a set of sideline meetings with other world leaders. Our Oh Soo-young has the details.
President Yoon Suk-yeol's office has welcomed Japan's invitation for South Korea to join the G7 meeting in May, amid anticipation that the two neighbors will discuss strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. A few hours after Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced on Monday he'd asked 8 countries to join the summit in Hiroshima, Seoul's top office spokesperson Yoon said in a written statement Monday this was a positive measure taken as a result of the Yoon-Kishida summit last week, affirming their will to resolve the historical sticking points that triggered the trade war in 2019. The two leaders at their summit last week agreed to take steps to resume and bolster trade and active diplomacy. Critically, they saw eye to eye on strengthening cooperation in the face of various economic and security challenges, with the South Korean president highlighting the two countries' common values of upholding liberal democracy, the rule of law and market economy. Yoon told Japanese media before his meeting with Kishida that attending the G7 meeting would provide a chance to establish strong solidarity and cooperation with countries that share universal values, mainly in security, economy and trade. The G7 summit is widely expected to focus on the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine and financial instability across the global economy. On the sidelines, the leaders of South Korea, Japan and the United States are likely to meet to discuss North Korea's growing nuclear and missile threat, as well as ways to bolster economic security and technological cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. In this regard, Japanese media reported that Canada is eager to form a 4-country cooperation framework with Seoul, Tokyo and Washington amid geopolitical frictions with China and Russia. Such an informal framework already exists, comprising the US, Japan, India and Australia, known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad for short. The Japan Times cited diplomatic sources who said Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau proposed a new Quad to Kishida in January. When questioned about the idea, a South Korean presidential official told reporters they hadn't heard of a new Quad so far, but cooperation in military and economic security is highly likely to be discussed during the G7 summit or Yoon's upcoming summit with US President Joe Biden next month. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The UN Security Council has once again responded with no action against North Korea's latest ballistic missile launches due to China and Russia shielding the regime. During a meeting convened on Monday in New York, South Korea, the US, Japan, and other Western countries called for the 15-member body to take collective action against the regime. But China and Russia defended the North's latest missile launch, calling it a response to Seoul-Washington joint military exercises, in line with the regime's stance of calling it war preparations. The meeting follows the North's firing of a short-range ballistic missile on Sunday, a fifth round of provocations since March 9th in a show of protest against the Allies' exercise. Now on to the high-stakes meeting. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping held their first face-to-face, showcasing their tight friendship. The meeting comes just days after an international criminal court issued an arrest warrant for Putin, prompting the U.S. to cast doubt on Beijing's claims of playing peacemaker. Lee Seung-jae has more.
President Xi Jinping is currently on a 3-day visit to Russia. There, the Chinese leader met with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday for what Beijing has billed as peace talks as part of Xi's vision to mediate a deal to end the conflict in Ukraine. During the talks, the two leaders touted their close ties amid geopolitical tensions and their shared strategic vision. Calling him a dear friend, Xi showed continued support for Putin amid international condemnation of the ongoing war in Ukraine and the recent issuing of an arrest warrant for the Russian leader by the International Criminal Court. Washington, however, remains skeptical over what they believe to be China's real intentions. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken went as far as to slam Beijing for siding with Moscow, despite the ICC arrest warrant for Putin for alleged war crimes.
That President Xi is traveling to Russia days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for President Putin suggests that China feels no responsibility to hold the Kremlin accountable for the atrocities committed in Ukraine, and instead of even condemning them, it would rather provide diplomatic cover for Russia to continue to commit those very crimes.
Both U.S. and European officials are also concerned that China may even add fuel to the war in Ukraine, with Washington still believing that Beijing is open to supplying Russia with artillery shells. Not to mention, Washington also believes that any ceasefire deal brokered by China may be more beneficial to Russia.
But we are concerned that, instead, China will reiterate calls for a ceasefire that leaves Russian forces inside Ukraine's sovereign territory. Now, any ceasefire that does not address the removal of Russian forces from Ukraine would effectively ratify Russia's illegal conquests.
U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby says Xi should also consider Ukraine, with the Chinese leader expected to hold phone talks with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky after his visit to Russia. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Staying overseas, the French government has narrowly survived 2 no-confidence votes against President Emmanuel Macron, clearing the way for his unpopular pension reforms to be finally implemented. Kim Jung-shi reports.
The voting took place at the French National Assembly on Monday local time. The no-confidence votes were triggered by opposition parties when the French government forced an increase in the pension age by 2 years from the current 62 to 64. The votes had been technically the last resort in order to stop the French government from implementing the hugely unpopular pension reforms.
Here are the results. The absolute majority needed for the no-confidence vote was 287. Those in favor of the motion were 278. Since the number didn't reach the majority, the motion of no confidence was not adopted.
9 votes stopped the first motion of no confidence. The second no-confidence vote was then tabled by Marine Le Pen's right-wing National Rally Party and only managed to get 94 votes in favor, paving the way for Macron's government to pass the pension reform. Since the margin of Macron's victory was so thin, the opposition party said the French government politically has nothing to be rejoicing about.
Yes, this motion of no confidence failed, but it only needed 9 more votes. That's a lot less than what was forecasted by several polls done by political analysts and journalists.
Monday's failed vote sparked fresh protests all over France, with a tense standoff between protesters and police.
I speak for the cleaners. We have a very difficult job. We have workers who wake up very early for 40 years, 5 a.m., even 4 a.m., and finish at 10 p.m. It's tiring. People cannot continue working until 64 years old. It's impossible.
With protests taking place all over the country, President Emmanuel Macron is suffering from his lowest approval rating since the height of the Yellow Vest anti-government protests over fuel taxes in 2018. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
South Korea's sluggish export figures are expected to see improvement in the second quarter of this year. According to the Korea International Trade Association on Tuesday, the Export Business Survey Index jumped to 90.9 for the April to June period from 81.8 the quarter before. The index has improved for the first time in 4 quarters, but the figure is still below 100, meaning the outlook remains pessimistic. By item, exports of cargo ships, petroleum products, and cars are expected to rise from the previous quarter. However, due to lower chip prices and growing U.S.-China tensions, outbound shipments of semiconductors are expected to drop in the second quarter. South Korea's production prices rose for the second month in a row in February. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the country's production price index, an indicator of future inflation, went up by 0.1% compared to the previous month. This was led by price increases in services such as dining and accommodation, as well as the production of chemical goods and electronic devices. However, prices of electricity and gas dropped by 0.3% in February, coming back down slightly after jumping 4% in January. A critical climate report is out. It gives us a final warning that the world's next thousands of years will depend on what we do this decade in terms of reducing carbon emissions. Our Choi Min-jung has the details.
The world is beyond the point where climate change can be somebody else's problem. This is according to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also called the IPCC. The body of climate scientists released its 6th assessment report, which included scientific and socio-economic data concerning climate change.
The report offers hope, and it provides a warning. It warns that the pace and scale of what has been done so far and current plans are insufficient to tackle climate change. We are walking when we should be sprinting.
The IPCC said continued greenhouse gas emissions will lead to further global warming, with the best estimate that global temperatures will increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius from the period between 1850 and 1900 early in the next decade. It added that actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are more urgent than previously assessed, and that the remainder of the current decade is key to securing a sustainable future for all. To limit warming, the IPCC said emissions should be cut by almost half by 2030 across all sectors. If countries were to fail to meet this goal, the average global temperature is forecast to rise by around 2.8 degrees by 2100. The report reiterated previous findings that it is unequivocal that humanity is to blame for climate change. It appealed to increased international cooperation, including improved access to adequate financial resources, particularly for vulnerable regions. It added that shifting to clean energy would not only help combat climate change, but also impact people's health and well-being. The IPCC said the planet has already warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius since the second half of the 19th century, which has caused frequent and more intense extreme weather events around the world. It warns that the world is bound to face ever more disastrous impacts if warming exceeds 1.5 degrees Celsius. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
And one impact of climate change, as well as other factors such as the use of pesticides, is that honeybees are disappearing. The rapid drop in the number of honeybees has become a challenge for farmers. As a solution, a team of domestic researchers have developed a new kind of smart beehive. Yoon reports.
The recent decline in honeybees has harmed farmers that use the bees for pollination. This strawberry farmer has resorted to using different types of bees, but the outcome hasn't been very fruitful.
A lot of bees have died this year. I'm worried more will die in the coming years. We need to come up with a solution.
Honeybees in this greenhouse nearby seem to be greater in number and much more active. What's inside is a smart beehive. On the outside, it looks like any other hive, but there's a special device inside. This sensor controls the environment on the inside, keeping the temperature at 30 degrees Celsius and the humidity at 60%. This technology allows farmers to closely monitor the hives and quickly respond if there is a problem.
The rate of bees spawning is good. I think it will continue until the end of April when strawberry planting season ends.
The smart beehive has been shown to give honeybees a longer lifespan, which in turn has increased production of tomatoes and strawberries. For farmers, this results in an earnings increase of 1 million won, roughly $770 per 1,000 square meters.
We hope to expand and distribute this technology to help beekeepers manage an environment where the bees are healthier and produce honey more effectively.
The Rural Development Administration plans to patent the technology behind the smart beehive and launch pilot projects by distributing the smart hives to beekeepers in 8 locations throughout the country this year. Yoon, Arirang News.
Amid a rise in the number of those facing so-called lonely deaths in South Korea, some neighborhoods in the country are taking their efforts door to door to check on and speak with their neighbors who live alone. Lee Si-hoo reports.
Choi Young-myung and Kim Yoon-suk, residents of Bangak-idong in Dobong-gu district in Seoul, are on a special mission. After living in the area for over 30 years, they don't need a map to reach their destination, which is the home of a neighbor who lives alone. The greeting is followed by a check of how the neighbor is doing.
그래도 눈 아프시고 그래도 병원 계속 다니시죠?
네, 약은 계속 침침하고 이쪽은 반밖에 안 보여요. 시력을 잃어서.
그러니까 그래도 저 알아보시는데요? 알아보시잖아요.
Mrs. Choi and Mrs. Kim are part of an 8-person team in Bangak-idong which cares for neighbors that live alone. They regularly visit and make phone calls to some 990 neighbors. When the two spot potential risks in their neighbors' lives, they connect them to a social worker who can provide the necessary help. The team also shares necessities such as bedding and food.
The positive thing about this work is easing the loneliness our neighbors feel. We listen to the stories of their difficulties and problems and become sort of like talking buddies.
Since we are neighbors, they sometimes feel they can share more than they would with social workers. We then work with the experts to solve problems, and it creates a more coordinated effect.
Such help is needed now more than ever, with more so-called lonely deaths occurring in South Korea. According to a report from last year, the number of people dying alone has been on the increase in recent years, a phenomenon that the government says has been caused in part by increased urbanization.
The community and voluntary efforts are needed to find these unseen neighbors. While it's important for public officials to monitor regularly, it's also important for other neighbors to check whether the lights go on and off and doors open and close.
What's needed is a community culture.
Most importantly, the community culture needs to be revived. While this can be difficult to achieve in today's competitive and individualistic society, the culture of solidarity and sharing needs to be in place for a long-term solution.
Meanwhile, the South Korean government is set to announce a comprehensive lonely death prevention plan within the first half of the year. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Jennie from popular K-pop girl group Blackpink is celebrating a new record for online music video views. On Tuesday, the music video for her debut single Solo passed 900 million views on YouTube, making her first female K-pop solo artist to achieve the feat. According to her agency YG Entertainment, the video passed a milestone figure at 12:56 a.m., 4 years and 4 months after it was first released in November 2018. The single is about a woman who does not wallow in sadness after a breakup and embraces independence, and was a huge success upon its release.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Somalia, a new report says that the drought there killed tens of thousands of people in 2022. According to a United Nations report, as many as 43,000 people may have died in the Horn of Africa as a result of diseases and malnutrition linked to the drought last year. Released on Monday, the report added that about half the estimated deaths were children under the age of 5. The figures mark the first official death toll from Somalia's current drought crisis. And with an additional 18,000 to 34,000 deaths expected in the first half of 2023, it's likely the death toll from the ongoing drought could exceed that of a previous dry season in 2017 to 2018. The UN says it needs $2.6 billion to respond to Somalia's drought, but only 15% of that has been secured. Turning over to the Ukraine, as the European Union's foreign and defense ministers have agreed to send about 1 million artillery shells to Kyiv over the span of 12 months. The decision to send the 155mm shells was made in Brussels on Monday and will see some European countries send some of their own stockpiles to the war-torn country. Some will also joint purchase $2.1 million of additional ammunition. A portion of the purchased ammunition will be used to replenish the EU's own supply. The United States has also pledged further military aid with $350 million worth of ammunition and military equipment. The support comes after Kyiv said that its forces needed to ration its ammunition amid supply shortages. The world may not be all gloom and doom, at least according to the 2023 World Happiness Index. Released on the International Day of Happiness, March 20th, the index claims that the world is happier than before the COVID-19 pandemic. This is because acts of kindness counterbalanced misery factors. It's the 10th report of its kind, with 100,000 people across 137 countries taking part. Participants were asked to evaluate their lives on a scale of 1 to 10. Finland claimed the title of World's Happiest Nation as it ranked number 1 for the 6th straight year. It was followed by Denmark and Iceland, with South Korea ranked at 57th. And finally, Rupert Murdoch is set to tie the knot for the 5th time at the age of 92. The billionaire media mogul proposed to his partner, 66-year-old Anne Leslie Smith, on St. Patrick's Day. The couple met in September last year at an event hosted at one of Murdoch's California-based properties. During an interview with his own publication, The New York Post, on Monday, Murdoch said that this marriage will be his last. The couple intend to get married this summer. Murdoch has 6 children from his previous marriages and is the owner of media powerhouse News Corporation, which controls media brands such as Fox News. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It's a spring equinox today, already the 4th spring season term on the traditional calendar. And right on cue, spring warms is in full swing nationwide, a chilly start turning to much warmer highs. Air quality has improved compared to yesterday, but still, dust is lingering in the air, especially in western parts of the country where dust levels were very bad yesterday. The air quality will be poor all day today. A dry weather advisory remains in effect in most parts, while Jeju Island is seeing rainfall, and it will be rainy through tomorrow with up to 30 millimeters of rainfall expected there. It feels more like the end of April than late March today, with some of the southern regions seeing highs nearing 25 degrees Celsius this afternoon. The warming trend hit its peak tomorrow with an expected high of 24 degrees in the capital. Southern provinces will see rain from tomorrow into early Thursday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of the day.